Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking a deep dive into two absolute powerhouses of the autoimmune world, systemic lupus erythematosus and rheumatoid arthritis. Now these are notoriously complex, multi-system conditions, but we're going to break down the clinical data step by step to see exactly how they operate, and more importantly, how modern medicine fights back.
We've had a pretty packed agenda today, which basically acts as our clinical roadmap. We'll map out SLE manifestations, take a deep dive into lupus nephritis, and then pivot to see how it contrasts with RA. From there, we'll explore RA's extra-articular features, the DAS28 scoring system, and wrap it all up with pharmacological management.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, SLE manifestations and criteria. So the absolutely crucial thing to understand about SLE right off the bat is that it doesn't just attack one specific organ. Nope, it's a true systemic disease. Basically, the immune system goes completely haywire and misidentifies the body's own cellular blueprints, we're talking its nuclear and cytoplasmic components, as foreign threats, and this triggers widespread chronic inflammation. When you evaluate an SLE patient, there are two hallmark skin signs that usually stand out immediately. First is the classic malar or butterfly rash. It's this fixed, constant redness that prominently spans the cheeks and the nasal bridge, but it notably spares the nasolabial folds, which is a key detail for separating it from conditions like rosacea. Then there's livedo reticularis, which is this distinct net-like vascular pattern on the skin that can actually evolve into full-blown vasculitis in severe cases. But the effects go way deeper than just the skin. SLE casts an incredibly wide net. Aside from profound fatigue, patients often deal with photosensitivity, hair loss, and typically non-erosive joint pain. But the internal damage, it can be absolutely severe. We're talking anything from a dangerous drop in white blood cells and platelets to life-threatening seizures or even pleurisy, which is an incredibly painful inflammation of the lung lining. Because these symptoms vary so wildly from patient to patient, formally diagnosing SLE actually requires some pretty strict criteria. The 2012 SLIC criteria demand 4 specific markers, carefully balancing clinical symptoms with immune markers. Alternatively, you have the newer 2019 EULAR/ACR system, which uses more of a funnel approach. Basically, a patient absolutely must have a positive ANA test just to enter the algorithm, which is then followed by a weighted point system, where severe issues like class 4 lupus nephritis score heavily.
Which brings us to section 2. Let's do a deep dive into lupus nephritis. We really have to ask a critical question here. What is the most serious, yet surprisingly often asymptomatic manifestation of SLE in that crucial first decade of the disease? Well, it's lupus nephritis, and recognizing this specific renal complication early is literally a matter of life and death. It's one of the leading causes of mortality in those first 10 years. The truly terrifying truth here is that in its early stages, it is almost entirely asymptomatic. A patient might feel totally fine while their kidneys are actively sustaining severe damage. This is exactly why mandatory, regular urinalysis is non-negotiable for SLE patients. We are actively hunting for heavy proteinuria and cellular casts before it's simply too late. To manage this beast, clinicians look straight at the renal tissue using the International Society of Nephrology classification playbook. Now, classes I and II usually don't need targeted nephritis treatment, but classes 3 and 4, those are the proliferative forms, and they carry a massive risk of end-stage renal disease, requiring aggressive immunosuppression immediately. By the time you hit class B, unfortunately, the damage has turned into irreversible scarring.
All right, moving on to section 3, a quick transition comparing SLE versus RA. So while SLE casts that wide, multi-system net with joint pain that's typically non-erosive, rheumatoid arthritis operates very differently. RA aggressively targets the joints, specifically causing erosive, destructive synovitis. And the autoantibody profiles totally flip too. SLE is driven by ANA and anti-dsDNA, whereas RA is characterized by rheumatoid factor and anti-citrullonated protein antibodies, commonly known as ACPA.
Let's unpack that further in section 4, RA extra-articular manifestations. Now, even though RA targets the joints, it certainly doesn't stop there. Up to 40% of RA patients develop features outside the joints entirely. This can include severe muscle wasting, known clinically as cachexia, and classic subcutaneous rheumatoid nodules. It can severely impact the eyes, causing intense dryness or painful scleritis. Down in the lungs, it can trigger dangerous interstitial lung disease. And crucially, patients who smoke or those with positive RF or ACPA blood tests are at a significantly higher risk for developing these severe systemic complications.
So how do we track this? That brings us to section 5, scoring RA using the DAS28. To calculate the disease activity score in 28 joints, the DAS28, we follow a strict 4-step clinical pathway. It literally turns subjective pain into hard math. First, you count the specific swollen joints. Second, you count the tender joints. Third, you pull the patient's blood work for acute phase reactants like ESR or CRP, which measures systemic inflammation. And finally, you combine all that with a visual scale where the patient rates their own global health on a scale from 0 to 100. Once you punch all that data into the calculator, you get a score that acts as your clinical compass. A score over 5.1 indicates high disease activity and demands immediate clinical action or a therapy change. Conversely, our ultimate destination, the holy grail of RA treatment, is a score under 2.6, which signals that the patient has finally reached clinical remission. Achieving that remission is the whole goal, which brings us to section 6, RA pharmacological management. The pharmacological hierarchy for RA is highly structured. At the top, you have NSAIDs and glucocorticoids. These offer rapid symptom relief. They act as a temporary bridge. But the real heavy lifting, that's done by disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, or DMARDs. Conventional DMARDs, anchored by methotrexate, actively slow down joint destruction over time. And for severe or refractory cases, we escalate to biologics. These are precision monoclonal antibodies that surgically block specific inflammatory pathways, like TNF-alpha or interleukin-6. The crucial takeaway from all these complex treatment algorithms is actually surprisingly simple. Identifying inflammatory arthritis early, before the joint is irreversibly injured, is quite literally everything. Early, aggressive, and highly individualized therapy isn't just recommended, it is absolutely mandatory if we want to prevent permanent disability.
Which leaves us with a fascinating question to close out this explainer. As our pharmacological tools, these incredibly precise biologics and targeted synthetic drugs, become ever more advanced, are we approaching an era where irreversible joint destruction and lupus-induced organ failure become purely historical? Will these once crippling autoimmune powerhouses soon be entirely subdued? It is a genuinely hopeful thought for the future of rheumatology. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the science.